These are the areas that are going to be affected by the lunar eclipse in Virgo the most. We are looking at the zenith of the moon and the sun during the lunar eclipse, but I know you're looking also at those yellow and white vertical lines. The white vertical line represents the moon midheaven line, and the yellow vertical line represents the sun midheaven line. I have an orb of influence for those two that I'm testing out. Let's take a look. These are the areas that possibly will be affected. Let's zero in a little bit more. Yeah, you see how Iran is kind of highlighted there, as well as the US, amongst other countries as well. So let's see how this is going to play out. So the lunar eclipse is basically a very special and aligned full moon. And so this full moon lunar eclipse is happening in Virgo. And full moons, especially lunar eclipses, are about letting go and releasing. But what makes it special with the eclipses is that it's very karmic and kind of like path shifting. It has a heightened importance than any other full moon. And this one is happening in Virgo. And so the things that we are letting go of is associated with detail orientedness, nitpicking, practical detailed plans, perfectionism, being of practical service for others, our devotion for very detailed plans and things like that. And we're leaning more towards where the sun is at, which is in Pisces. So we're going to try to intuit our way into things, being considerate of our emotions as well as others, kind of like getting in our feelings a bit. And it could bring, honestly, a little bit of fogginess, but it could also bring in some interesting intuitive intel as well. Now, in mundane astrology, the moon represents the people and the sun represents, authority figures such as presidents, prime ministers, monarchs, celebrities, people, specific people of power, like head of state. So it seems like the people are focusing more on what's practical, what makes sense, the details, while the higher ups are basing things off of their feelings and emotions and the vibes, which is fine, but I mean like time and place. Now, if we look at the aspects, what's really interesting is that the moon is making a conjunction to South Node, but a separated conjunction representing something that happened before the eclipse, which is pretty accurate here because, again, the moon represents the people and the public opinion. And South Node often speaks of a sacrifice that is had. It's quite malefic. And so I feel like this speaks to a lot of the lives that recently has been lost through all the attacks that we've been seeing around the world in Western Asia. And with the sun being opposite the moon, authority figures are, acting one way, the people are acting and reacting in another way. And there is obviously most of the world is not quite agreeing with how authority figures are moving right now. That's the opposition. The moon is also making an applying opposition to Mercury retrograde, telling me that there could be issues with communication, like telecommunications and things like that. There being like kind of like fogginess and information not being fully exposed and let out like people want it to be, which sounds quite familiar. There could be also some issues with traveling. So guys, please be careful. Mistakes could be easily made, but it also seems like information that, people try to hide is going to be potentially exposed even more. And we're looking into the past because that's what we do during retrograde season. Wouldn't be surprised if things kind of connected with like boats will be affected, especially with that water sign connection with Mercury and the sun, as well as North Node, as well as Jupiter. Actually, the moon is making a sextile to Jupiter. Jupiter is connected to the bankers, the judicial system, religious figures. And so it's interesting because it's making good aspects to both the sun and the moon. The aspects are more flowing with the sun. So it seems like that, these figures, the judicial system, bankers, religious folks are, in alliance with the people of power, and is a more of an easy flowing energy. However, they are trying to also play the middle person with that sextile to that moon, almost like a mediator, trying to support the people as well and trying to understand what the people want to then kind of transfer over to the people of power so they can understand what's going on. Jupiter is associated with long distance travel as well. I wouldn't be surprised if there's issues with planes and anything else associated with long distance travel, such as cruises or something like that. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, which is great, but but it's also retrograde. And also, this could kind of bring a good and bad situation. With that exaltation, it's definitely helpful, but the retrograde energy, things can come forward from the past, or things could be delayed as well. Mercury's retrograde, there's definitely going to be some delays, and Mercury is honestly fallen in Pisces as well. A debilitation is not in a good spot. So be prepared for mistakes, issues, miscommunications, accidents for sure. People going back on their word or being caught going back on their word, things like that. Let's go ahead and look at the map again. So again, from my studies, I love to look at the zenith of the sun and the moon during eclipses. Um, these are important, and they have like an orb of influence that I specifically use when it comes to doing these type of world predictions and everything. And all these markers are the exact points of where the sun and the moon was at during this eclipse. That's like projected onto the earth. The whole latitude of that area is affected, as well as a little 10-degree orb of influence, both up and down. So that's why these areas are highlighted for sure. And most likely there will be something significant happening within these areas. However, we can't forget the vertical lines too. I'm practicing to see what orb of influence I should use when it comes to the longitude, but I can't help but to see that like Iran's highlighted here for the sun, and for the moon, the United States is highlighted. And I will say that, the general public in the United States is not feeling what's going on right now. Same with the rest of North America, they're not feeling it. And so this makes sense that we are represented by the moon here, and the moon is on our side of the earth. But what's interesting too is that, but eclipses typically represent a loss of leadership, right? Someone of power who either loses their life or loses their spot. Again, these leadership figures are represented by the sun. And Iran happens to be within the orb of influence that is highlighted in this map that I created. And they did lose a couple of leaders. And it's specifically what's highlighted in the Eastern Hemisphere where, Iran is highlighted. What's represented here is the sun energy. And so it's the sun zenith, the sun energy. And so it's representing that leader, what leader is being lost. And who was involved in that leader losing their life? America. And the moon is on the opposite. Do you see how this plays out with astrocartography? But yeah, this is just one of the events that are happening due to this lunar eclipse. Again, rest of these areas are being highlighted. Again, I'm seeing the Congo and Sudan lit up. I'm praying for them. I did a video about the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and I noticed, Palestine being, highlighted there in the map that I created. And so, this is just another example of in mundo astrocartography being on point, astrology being on point, and just the accuracy that's shown right now. Sending love and prayers to everyone whose lives were lost. It's really heartbreaking.